It started with a bright orange sticker slapped onto my front door like a warning from some dystopian HOA regime. Immediate action required, $79. Fine vehicle parked facing the wrong direction. Below it, in all caps Comic Sans, someone had scrawled, "Pay OR face escalation." I almost laughed. Almost. I was tired. I'd just gotten home from a 17-hour shift, hostage negotiation, 2 standoffs, and a meth lab explosion in a garden shed. All I wanted was a hot shower, my couch, and silence. Instead, I got this. A parking violation in my own driveway. From the HOA's self-appointed security squad. They weren't actual police. They weren't even security guards. They were volunteer compliance officers, neighbors in fake uniforms with radios and ticket books. Their leader, a man named Craig, who once called 911 because someone's Halloween decorations were too realistic. Craig was also the kind of guy who thought HOA bylaws were sacred texts. And now, apparently, I'd broken one. At first, I ignored it. I figured the sticker was a mistake. I've lived here 8 years, paid my dues on time, never left trash out. My grass was shorter than a marine buzz cut. But the next day, it escalated. They blocked my driveway. At exactly 8:03 a.m., I stepped out with my coffee and saw 2 orange cones, a yellow caution chain, and a printed sign that said, "Access suspended, compliance hold." Standing beside it were 2 men in matching polos and cargo vests with HOA Compliance Division. Stitched across the back, Craig was one of them. He raised a clipboard like it was a badge. "Morning, sir. I'm going to need you to resolve the outstanding balance before we can allow driveway access." I stared at the cones, then at Craig. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," he said, puffing out his chest. "You've been warned." I sipped my coffee slowly. "Craig, move the cones." "Sir, this is a formal enforcement action. I'm not asking." He gave a smug little smile. "If you want to go that route, I'll have to report non-compliance. We'll add it to your file. This could go to collections." I let the silence stretch. Then I said 5 words I hadn't said outside the station in years. "Do you know who I am?" Craig laughed. "Sir, everyone says that. HOA law is HOA law." I set my coffee down on the hood of my truck, walked calmly back inside, and returned with my badge. Chief of Police, District 3 name, Daniel Rowe. Craig went pale. The second officer took a half step back. "You've got to be kidding," Craig said. I raised the badge. "What part of this looks like a joke?" He blinked. "But, you're wearing gym shorts." "Because I got off duty at 2 a.m. after talking a man off a bridge and pulling a kid out of a fentanyl house." "You really want to escalate this over?" $79. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "You're going to remove the cones. You're going to delete whatever violation file you made up. And if you or anyone else steps foot on my property again, I'm going to hit you with trespassing, harassment, impersonating a peace officer, and unlawful vehicle obstruction." Craig's voice cracked. "It's in the HOA charter." "I don't answer to your charter. I answer to the law, which you've just broken in at least 3 ways." The cones disappeared within 60 seconds. Craig mumbled something about filing an appeal, and walked off like he'd been publicly pantsed. That should have been the end of it, but of course, it wasn't, because Craig wasn't just a petty little man with a clipboard. He was also the head of the HOA's so-called Civic Code Enforcement Task Team, and by that night, they declared war. It started small. Trash schedule notices stuffed in my mailbox, a picture of my recycling bin, circled in red marker, a note taped to my back fence. Security camera violation, too visible from public property. I kid you not. They claimed my Ring doorbell was an aesthetic obstruction. I thought about ignoring it, but something about the way they came at me, organized, coordinated, hiding behind bylaw numbers and fake authority, pushed a button I hadn't felt in years, because I've dealt with real criminals. I've faced down hostage takers, drug lords, cartel enforcers, and yet, there was something uniquely nasty about a man who uses rules not to protect people, but to punish them. They weren't doing this for order, they were doing it for control. I opened my laptop that night and pulled up the HOA's entire 342-page rulebook. Then I printed the real county zoning codes and started cross-referencing, and I found something. Beautiful. Craig and his little army. They were breaking more rules than they were enforcing. They'd modified signage without permits, installed cameras on community grounds without approval. One of their officers didn't even live in the neighborhood. His address traced back to another HOA entirely. So I started gathering evidence, photographs, paper, trails, statements from other neighbors, and the best part, they had no idea I was coming. Craig didn't back down after our first confrontation. If anything, he doubled down by the following weekend. The entire neighborhood was under siege, not from criminals or chaos, but from clipboards and cargo vests. They weren't just enforcing rules anymore. They were hunting for violations. One neighbor got written up for unauthorized mailbox decals. Another received a printed citation slipped under her windshield for patio furniture, inconsistent with design theme. A single plastic flamingo on a front lawn earned a $39 fine and a letter warning of community devaluation through eccentric lawn accessories. It would have been hilarious if it wasn't so serious. These guys, Craig and his hand-picked band of self-important compliance officers, had gone from passive-aggressive to full-on delusional. They had radios now, earpieces, matching name tags that read Neighborhood Watch Certified, which isn't even a real title. They printed them themselves at an office supply store. They even had an SUV, a white one with magnetic stickers slapped on the doors. HOA enforcement, unit, and when they started driving it slowly past people's homes, that's when things turned ugly. People stopped walking their dogs during daylight, kids stayed inside. One resident, an elderly veteran, called the actual sheriff's department. After Craig threatened to fine him for his American flag being improperly illuminated after dusk, I spoke to him myself. He said I was non-compliant. The old man told me, shaking his head. Can you believe that? I was in 2 wars and got called non-compliant over a flag light. The neighborhood was cracking. Not because of crime, but because of cowards in khakis, pretending to be cops. And I wasn't the only one noticing. I quietly met with 5 other homeowners. All of us had received ridiculous notices in the last 2 weeks. We met in my garage, blinds drawn, documents in hand. There was Carol, the mom who got written up because her daughter's sidewalk chalk defaced common grounds. Miguel, who was warned for excessively loud wind chimes. Tabitha, a nurse who was cited for lingering vehicle presence because she worked night shifts. Devin and Marcia, a couple in their 30s, fined for hosting a gathering without HOA visibility, aka barbecue. We formed an informal resistance not out of rebellion, but out of necessity, because it was clear the HOA wasn't protecting the community, they were policing it, and not even legally. I feel like I'm living in a gated dictatorship, Carol muttered. Did you know they took photos of my license plate? Devon added. Same here, said Miguel, from the street, like paparazzi. I filed a privacy complaint. They told me to consider my behavior. We laid everything out. Photos, letters, fines, audio recordings from meetings. It was more than enough to start building a real legal case. But before I filed anything formal, I had another idea. If Craig wanted to play pretend cop, it was time he got treated like one. The next morning, I put on my real uniform. Not the soft hoodie and gym shorts he'd seen before. Full blues. Badge, polished. Belt, clipped. Drove my unmarked apartment SUV past his house, slow enough to make a point. Then I parked right behind his fake enforcement unit van and waited. It took 5 minutes. Craig came out of his garage with a radio and clipboard, froze mid-step, and turned a shade of pale I'd only seen on crime suspects and kids who just broke a window. He tried to play it cool. Morning, officer. Chief. He nodded. Right. Chief, is there a situation? I stepped out of my vehicle and handed him a paper. It was a notice of pending investigation into impersonation of law enforcement, illegal surveillance, harassment, and misuse of community resources. Is this real? He asked, eyes scanning the page. Let's just say it's more real than anything in that vest. He looked down at his HOA Compliance Division patch like it might explode. And Craig, I leaned in slightly. You're not just annoying, you're breaking actual state and municipal laws. You crossed the line when you targeted people, elderly, working parents, anyone who challenged you. He tried to speak, but I raised a finger. I'm not pressing charges yet, but if you or your group issue one more fine, touch one more mailbox, or block one more driveway, I will, and I won't need a clipboard to do it. Then I walked away. Left him standing there in his knockoff vest, holding a clipboard that suddenly felt very, very heavy. But it wasn't over, because what happens when someone drunk on control loses their grip? They panic, and panicked people make mistakes. Big ones. I thought Craig would back off after our last confrontation. I'd warned him, formally, in uniform, on paper, but I underestimated one thing. How far some people will go to keep pretending they matter, because when power is taken from someone who built their identity around it, they don't go quietly, they get reckless. And Craig, he didn't retreat. He escalated. It started with the noise complaints. 3 in 1 week. Filed anonymously. Of course. Monday, excessive use of power tools before 9 a.m. Wednesday, unapproved use of a generator on private property. Friday, suspected firearm discharge heard from backyard. That last one made me laugh. I hadn't even been home that night. Then came the mail tampering allegations. Someone accused me of installing an illegal mailbox camera. Another report claimed I was harboring unregistered dogs. I don't even own a pet. They were throwing darts in the dark now, hoping something would stick, but they weren't just guessing, they were watching. Miguel knocked on my door. One evening holding a drone, he looked rattled. Found this in my tree, he said. It's got a 108 OP cam and a memory card. Guess what's on it? He handed it to me. I popped out the SD card and loaded it on my laptop. Footage of Miguel's backyard. his windows, his kids. Then my property, zoomed in, long-range angles, multiple visits. It wasn't just a drone. It was surveillance. And the worst part, the files were labeled, not timestamps, names. Row_angle 4_ backyard Tabitha _night view Carol _Rio Dorzumi. Felt my stomach. Turned. This wasn't petty HOA drama anymore. This was criminal behavior. I called an emergency meeting in my garage. The resistance group was growing. 6 more neighbors joined since last week, all with stories. Someone found a sticker tracker on their trash can. Another spotted a compliance officer standing on a ladder behind a bush, taking photos of attic vents. One woman, a retired teacher, had been anonymously accused of running an illegal tutoring business out of her home. The fear was real now, but so was the evidence. I created a dossier, printed everything, had footage of Craig's group entering private property, tim-stamped, audio of threats, a signed statement from Devon that Craig offered to forgive his BBQ fine in exchange for volunteering as a junior compliance agent. Now, surveillance drone footage of my own backyard. That was enough, so I did what I hadn't yet done. I filed an official report under my name and department. The next day, I called a meeting with the real police department's legal team and internal affairs liaison. I handed them the file, gave a sworn statement, and requested immediate review for invasion of privacy, impersonation of law enforcement, unlawful surveillance, intimidation, and harassment of multiple households. They took it seriously, more seriously than I expected. Because guess what? Turns out Craig's compliance vehicle wasn't just annoying, it was illegally registered under a false business name. Neighborhood Enforcement Services LLC wasn't real. The tags were expired. The lights on top, not standard hazard lights modified to flash red and blue. He was driving around in a fake police cruiser. I couldn't decide if I wanted to arrest him or thank him for making it so easy. The department issued a quiet warning that night. Craig and his HOA posse didn't know it yet, but they were being investigated. And surveillance laws? They don't play, especially when you aim a drone at a cop's house. Still, I stayed silent. Let them hang themselves with their own rope, but I made changes. Installed real cameras, upgraded motion sensors, had every square inch of my yard covered, legally and visibly in. I waited. Then, one night, around 11:30 p.m., I caught him. Craig. Creeping along the side of my house with a phone held up like he was scanning something through the window. I watched from the shadows of my living room. Still, let him get close enough to trigger the alert, then stepped out, badge out, flashlight blazing. He froze like a deer in headlights. I said nothing at first, just stared, then calmly. You're under surveillance, Craig. Every step, every photo, every drone flight. You're not above the law, you're under it. He stammered. I cut him off. Just building your own case file. He turned and walked off into the dark. He didn't run, but he didn't look back either. The next day, an official cease and desist order went out to the HOA board from the city attorney's office. It cited active investigation into HOA activities and warned of potential legal consequences for any further attempts at unauthorized surveillance or impersonation. But Craig still didn't quit, because to him, this wasn't just a power trip anymore, it was personal. And when petty people take things personally, they get dangerous, and desperate. For the first time in weeks, Craig's patrol SUV didn't appear. No cones in driveways, no notes on doors, no chalk marks on curbs. It felt like peace, but the kind of peace that feels too quiet. Like when you walk into a room and you know someone was just talking about you. The whole neighborhood sensed it. The sidewalks were empty. Windows stayed shut. Even the kids, normally unfazed by grown-up nonsense, rode their bikes quietly that afternoon, eyes darting toward the HOA office as they passed. It was like the air had shifted. Something was brewing. I got the first call just before noon. Tabitha, the night shift nurse, sounded panicked. There's a flyer taped to my back door, she said, but it's inside my gate. Someone came into my yard. I drove over. Sure enough, a single sheet of paper. Typed. No logo. Just a line of text. Some rules go beyond the law. No signature, no HOA, letterhead. Just a threat dressed in mystery. Night 3 more people called me. Miguel's garden gnome was smashed, and in its place, a plastic caution sign. Carol's patio cushions were missing. Her porch light had been UNSCREWED. Devon and Marsh's welcome mat had been slashed with what looked like a box cutter. They weren't just retaliating, they were going dark ops, sneaking onto property, avoiding cameras, leaving traces without proof. It was cowardly, and it was intentional. They knew the city attorney's letter had tied their hands, at least publicly. So now, they were trying to terrorize the neighborhood from the shadows. I held back on responding, not because I was afraid, but because I was waiting. You see, fear makes people sloppy, and eventually Craig's side made a mistake, a big one. 3 nights later, Devon texted me at 2:17 a.m. He's out there, back corner. Got him on cam. I bolted out of bed, grabbed my jacket, and was on his porch in 4 minutes. We watched the live camera feed together. They're barely visible. A figure crouched near Devon's backyard fence. He had something in his hands. Looked like wire. Then, we saw it. A trail camera, like the kind hunters used, being zip-tied to a tree, aimed directly at their living room window. Devin looked at me. Is this funnily enough? It is now, I said. I called it in, not as a favor, but as a formal investigation request. By morning, detectives were at the scene. Evidence was bagged, witness statements collected. Craig's face was caught crystal clear on infrared. I expected him to disappear after that, but what he did instead, he called a town hall meeting. The flyer arrived in everyone's mailboxes. The next day, community alert meeting, URGNT location, HOA community center date, Thursday, 6 p.m. Topic, restoring order to our neighborhood underneath. It read, this is our home. We must stand together against infiltration and intimidation. HOA Civic Code Enforcement Team. It was bold and it was bait. He wanted to retake control, to scare the neighborhood into thinking we were the problem. I didn't plan to go, but my neighbors, they wanted me there. We need you, Miguel said, not just as a cop, as a neighbor. So I showed up, wore civilian clothes, sat in the back, watched as Craig stood at the front of the room in a button-down and slacks, acting like some kind of reluctant leader under siege. He opened with this. There has been a coordinated effort to undermine safety in our community. Rules have been ignored, authority has been challenged, and now people are acting like victims when we've simply done our duty. Murmurs. He passed out incident reports. Most were fake, doctored, timelines, distorted images. Let me be clear, he said. We are not the enemy. But if the law won't enforce order, someone has to. Then he looked at me, eyes locked. He said, even law enforcement has failed us. That was it. I stood up, walked to the front, pulled out a small stack of real documents, citations, privacy complaints, cease and desist, notices, and a copy of the footage showing him placing the trail cam in Devin's tree. The room went dead, silent. I looked at the crowd, not Craig. Enforcing community standards is fine. Surveillance, trespassing, harassment, that's not enforcement. That's a crime. I turned to Craig. And Craig, the next time you step onto someone's private property without permission, you won't need a clipboard. You'll need a lawyer. And then I handed him the best part, a restraining order. A restraining order. Signed that morning, served that night. He turned red, opened his mouth to argue, but for the first time since this all began, no one defended him. People walked out, one by one. Tabitha, Miguel, Carol, even Mrs. Flynn, the quiet librarian who never picked a side. Craig stood alone, blinking under the harsh fluorescent lights, his stack of fake reports trembling in his hands. The clipboard army had lost its grip. The silence was now his. The next morning, a plain white envelope showed up on my porch. No return address, no stamp, just the words, we need to talk urgently. Inside a single page, Chief Rowe, we didn't authorize this. Please meet us privately. The HOA board. I stared at it for a moment, debating. I didn't trust any of them. They'd been silent for too long, but silence under pressure can sometimes mean one thing. Cracks are forming. So I texted Carol to keep an eye on my place, clipped my badge to my belt just in case, and drove to the HOA office. The beige stucco building with fake columns and a flagpole that always flew the HOA logo instead of the national flag. I walked in. It smelled like toner and desperation. 3 people were waiting, all members of the HOA board. Janice Smith's glasses. Lived here longer than anyone. Ron, the treasurer, nervous eyes and coffee-stained teeth. Whitney Young, mid-30s probably, joined the board to make a difference before Craig swallowed the system. Holginess stood first. We didn't know, she said quickly. Whitney nodded. Craig, he's been doing things on his own. I crossed my arms. You let him. Ron shook his head. We tried to rein him in after the drone thing, but he's got followers now. People think he's protecting the community. No, I said. People are afraid of him. That's different. They showed me emails. Craig had stopped logging his violations into the HOA records months ago. He was creating his own spreadsheets, issuing off-book citations, and deleting complaints filed against him. He even added new volunteers to the enforcement team without board approval. He's running a private security force, Whitney muttered. Worse, I replied. He's running it with fake authority and real fear. And now he's got a restraining order, a county investigation, and half the neighborhood documenting his every move. Janice took a shaky breath. We want to remove him. I raised an eyebrow. Finally, but we need your help, she added. Legally, quietly, before this gets bigger. I took a moment before answering because this wasn't just about removing a rogue volunteer anymore. This was about fixing the entire system that let a guy like Craig thrive. I gave them a plan. Step by step. 1. Suspend the HOA civic enforcement team immediately and indefinitely. 2. Freeze all outstanding fines and citations, pending legal review. 3. Issue a community-wide letter acknowledging the abuse of power, signed by all board members. 4. Ban Craig from all HOA roles and prohibit him from appearing on any HOA property without prior board approval. 5. Send me copies of all internal communications dating back 6 months, especially anything tied to Craig's task force. Janice hesitated. That's going to make us look weak. No, I said. It'll make you look accountable. There's a difference. They agreed. And that afternoon, a message went out to every resident. Dear community members, effective immediately, the HOA Civic Enforcement Team is suspended pending internal and legal review. We acknowledge recent events have created discomfort, confusion, and distrust within our community. Please know this is being addressed with urgency. The HOA board, no mention of Craig by name, but everyone knew. That night, the group chat we'd started months ago lit up like a Christmas tree. It's happening. They're finally cutting Craig off. Chief, you legend. About time someone stood up. For the first time, the neighborhood felt united. But victory wasn't fully sealed, because Craig, he didn't take the news well. I was walking my property the next morning when I saw it, a single traffic cone, placed directly in the middle of my driveway, taped to it, a handwritten note in all caps. The law changes nothing. You still live here. I pulled the cone aside and called the county office because I had one final move to make. One that would end this not just for me, but for every future resident who might fall under the thumb of another clipboard tyrant. 3 days later, at the next scheduled HOA board meeting, I stood before the crowd in full uniform, not to threaten, but to propose a reform. I unveiled the community protection motion, a clause banning any form of private enforcement that mimics or impersonates law enforcement. Citations must be filed with board review and visible community oversight. TANU, 3-member resident oversight committee, with rotating membership to keep the board in check. Formal complaint process with protection from retaliation. Ban on unlicensed surveillance devices placed in or around HOA property at passed. By a landslide, even the die-hard clipboard cultists were too quiet, too embarrassed to oppose it. Craig didn't show up, not to vote, not to argue. He was gone. Word spread fast. Other neighborhoods reached out. Even a local news station picked it up. Police chief shuts down rogue HOA squad reform system from inside. They wanted an interview. I declined. Because for me, this wasn't about the headlines, it was about principle and people. In a neighborhood that finally remembered, power belongs to the community, not the clipboard. For a while, it seemed like peace had finally returned. No conus and no finis, no orange stickers on mailboxes. The neighborhood slowly came back to life. Lawn chairs returned to porches. Chalk drawings reappeared on sidewalks, and the sound of a weekend grill was no longer followed by a citation. Even the HOA board operated like normal people now. The new oversight committee included Miguel and Tabitha, and their first act was approving a rule that banned Craig from entering any community property without written permission. But we all knew it. It wasn't over. Not until he said it was it. Happened a week after the reform vote. Around midnight, I heard the sound of something scraping. Not loud, but deliberate. I checked the cameras. Nothing on the front porch. Nothing by the garage. But then I checked the side yard, the narrow strip between my fence and the neighbor's retaining wall. And there he was, Craig. Holding a spray can. In a hoodie, ball cap pulled low, tagging the back of my fence. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I slipped on my boots, called dispatch, and walked out the back door with my badge already hanging from my neck. When I rounded the corner with my flashlight, he froze mid-spray. I said nothing, just stood there. Craig slowly turned to face me. No cameras back here, he muttered. I pointed up to the solar-powered trail cam mounted above the shed. He dropped the can. So what now? He said. You going to cuff me? Parade me down the block? No, I said. You're going to explain what this is. He looked down at the fence. In thick red letters, he'd scrawled, "You'll never belong here." Something broke in me, not in anger, but in clarity. This was never about rules, never about fines, or fences, or bylaws. Craig's crusade had always been personal. Because to him, people like me, someone who didn't attend the HOA picnics, didn't bow to clipboard tyrants, didn't ask permission before putting in a motion light, were outsiders. I didn't fit his vision of the neighborhood. And now, with everything lost, this was all he had left. Red spray paint and bitterness. The patrol unit arrived. 3 minutes later. Craig didn't resist, didn't even speak, just lowered himself to the curb and waited, while the officer read him his rights. He was charged with vandalism, trespassing, and violation of a restraining order. I didn't even have to press charges. The restraining order made everything automatic. Craig was escorted off the property in silence. No neighbors came outside, but I knew they were, watching from darkened windows. Behind curtains, they saw it, and they remembered it, because this time, the clipboard king didn't leave on his terms. The next morning, the paint was already gone. Carol and Devin scrubbed it off before I even woke up. We figured you didn't want to look at that crap, Carol said, handing me a cup of coffee. I owe you one, I said. She smiled. No, you don't. Not anymore. A few days later, we held the first official meeting of the Community Oversight Committee. Real people with real voice. We started small. Canceled the last 24 fines. Craig issued reviewed surveillance rules and privacy protections. A new clause that allowed direct homeowner votes on enforcement policy changes, Tabitha called it. Giving the neighborhood back to the people. I liked that. As for Craig, the charges stuck. Turns out, This wasn't his first dance with questionable behavior. An old employer, from before he moved into our community, came forward during his arraignment hearing with records of workplace harassment and falsified reports. He took a plea deal. Community service, a fine, 1 year of court supervision, no contact with our HOA, and a permanent ban from any neighborhood governing body in the county. His house sold within 3 weeks. The listing didn't mention the drama, but word gets around, I'll admit. Part of me expected him to leave something behind, another spray-painted message, one last middle finger to the neighborhood that stopped bowing to him. But when he drove off that final time, there were no theatrics, just an empty driveway, an oddly satisfying silence. Weeks turned into a month. The fences stayed up, the cones disappeared, and I finally felt like I lived in a place I chose, not one I had to battle just to exist in. One afternoon, I saw Miguel helping Tabitha plant a small tree near the community. "Garden looks good," I said. "It's a peace tree," Miguel replied. I laughed. "That a real thing?" "Not really," he said, "but it feels right." And it did. Sometimes, power doesn't look like a badge or a rule book. Sometimes, it looks like standing your ground without raising your voice. Sometimes, the real enforcement doesn't come from citations, it comes from community. The morning air felt different, not just cooler, but lighter, like the weight of weeks of tension had finally lifted from the trees, the sidewalks, the very soil beneath our yards. For the first time in a long time, I stood in my driveway sipping coffee, and smiled. No cones, no citations, just the rhythm of a neighborhood being a neighborhood again. Kids squealing on scooters, a radio playing somewhere down the block, the gentle whoosh of sprinklers sweeping across the lawns. Peace by the yard, not because someone enforced it, but because we had earned it. A month had passed since Craig drove away for the last time. His house was already occupied by a young couple, newlyweds from out of state. They waved enthusiastically when I walked past their mailbox. No clipboard, no patrol SUV, just a pair of lawn chairs and a hanging plant that didn't quite match the color scheme of the HOA-approved flora. No one said a word. And that was the point. The HOA board changed too. The old guard Janice and Ron quietly stepped down, citing personal commitments. No one booed. No one clapped. It was understood Whitney stayed though. And she was different now, more open, less bureaucratic. She even helped host the first neighborhood meeting held outside, in the community park instead of the stuffy rec room. "I want people to feel welcome," she told me, not watched. That meeting looked nothing like the ones Craig used to lead. No badges, no citations, no fake compliance charts, just people, talking, solving, smiling. One of the most surprising things, people started planting again. It was subtle at first. Miguel put a small ceramic frog back in his front flower bed. Carol repainted her mailbox with little sunflowers. Devin and Marcia added string lights along their walkway. Tiny rebellions. Beautiful ones. The clipboard culture that had ruled us was dead. And the proof was in the details. The imperfect, vibrant, quirky little details that made a neighborhood feel alive. I didn't stay on the oversight committee. Once the reforms were in place, and the fake enforcement squad was officially disbanded, I quietly stepped back. Tabitha took over his chair. She was better for it anyway, patient, fair, and fearless when needed. As for me, I went back to what I loved, protecting people from real threats, coaching rookie officers. And watering my backyard garden without worrying if my hose was too visible from the curb. One Saturday morning, as I trimmed back the bougainvillea near my fence, I noticed something new on the other side. A sign, wooden hand carved. It read, "This fence once divided us. Now it just holds up vines." I walked around to the front and saw who'd placed it. Miguel, smiling sheepishly. "Too corny?" he asked. I shook my head. Perfect. And it was. Because that fence had been where Craig drew a line between himself and the people, between order and fear. Now it was just a fence, covered in color, blooming with peace. People ask me sometimes if I ever felt bad for Craig. My answer is always the same. I don't feel bad for people who use rules to hurt others. But I do feel something. Not sympathy, clarity, because his downfall didn't start with the drone, or the driveway cones, or even the $79 ticket. It started the moment he mistook control for community. And once you cross that line, once you believe people exist to obey, not belong, the fall is inevitable. There's a little girl down the street, now maybe 6 years old, who rides her scooter barefoot on the sidewalk, chalk flowers trailing behind her like a storybook. Every time she passes my driveway, she waves and shouts, "Hi, Chief," and I wave back, not because she knows I'm the police chief, but because I'm her neighbor. That's what Craig never understood. The badge doesn't make you a protector. The clipboard doesn't make you a leader. Belonging does. Trust, care. The choice to build something together instead of ruling over people like you built it alone. So yeah, peace finally returned. But it wasn't handed to us. It wasn't voted in. It was fought for. Not with fists or threats or louder voices, but with resolve, with truth, with the quiet power of good people, standing up and saying, "Not this time. Not in my neighborhood." And that, I've learned, is the kind of justice that lasts. The kind that grows like vines over old fences. The kind you feel when you stand in your yard and realize you don't have to fight to live here anymore.